In a small, drought-stricken village on the outskirts of the savannah, where survival was a daily battle, Zuri lived with her 2 children, Amara and Kosi. Life had never been easy since her husband's death, and as each year passed, the weight of poverty pressed down on Zuri's shoulders like an unforgiving boulder. Her meager earnings as a seamstress could no longer sustain her family, and death had become a familiar companion. The dry earth offered little hope for a good harvest, and hunger gnawed at their bellies every night. One fateful afternoon, Zuri crossed paths with Chief Odion, a powerful and wealthy man in the village. He was well past his prime, nearing 70, yet his riches made him a man of influence. Chief Odion had buried 3 wives, all much younger than himself, and rumor had it that his wealth was built on unspeakable acts. But in the eyes of a desperate woman like Zuri, he seemed to hold the keys to a better future for her family. Chief Odion had set his sights on Amara, Zuri's 14-year-old daughter, whose beauty and innocence stood in stark contrast to the misery that surrounded them. He offered Zuri a solution to her problems: marriage. In return, he promised to lift Zuri and her family out of poverty. He offered livestock, gold, and bags of grain, enough to turn their misfortune around. Despite the unease that gripped her heart, Zuri saw no other way. "Amara, you are a woman now," Zuri told her daughter one night, as they sat by the flickering fire outside their small mud house. "Chief Odion has agreed to marry you. He will provide for us and you." Amara's face went pale, her young heart sinking with fear. "But Mama, he is older than grandfather. I can't marry him, please, I beg you." Tears welled up in Zuri's eyes as she tried to console her daughter. "This is for the good of our family, Amara. I wish there was another way, but we have no choice. Life will be easier for all of us." Reluctantly, Amara agreed to the marriage, her spirit crushed under the weight of her family's suffering. The wedding was a grand affair, paid for by Chief Odion, who took great pride in showing off his new young bride. The village gossiped quietly, but no one dared to challenge the chief's decisions. After the celebration, Amara moved into Chief Odion's compound, where her new life began. Life in Chief Odion's home was nothing like the fairy tales they had hoped for. Behind the high walls of the chief's grand estate, Amara was treated like property rather than a wife. The chief, whose temper was as unpredictable as the wind, would lash out at Amara whenever she did not meet his demands. She was forced to serve him without rest, doing chores that seemed endless and suffering physical and emotional abuse when he was displeased. Amara's heart sank deeper with each passing day, and soon her only solace was in the brief moments when she could send messages to her mother. "Mama, I cannot endure this life any longer," she whispered into the phone one evening, her voice trembling with fear. "Chief Odion beats me, he treats me like an animal. Please, come and take me away." But when Zuri confronted Chief Odion about his treatment of Amara, the chief reached for his coin purse and silenced her with money. He waved a handful of gold coins in front of her and spoke sternly. "If you know what's good for you, you keep your mouth shut. Your family is enjoying my wealth, is it not enough?" Zuri, though sickened by her decision, allowed herself to be bought. The money, though tainted, was the only thing keeping her and Kosi from starving. Each time Amara called in desperation, Zuri's guilt deepened, but she convinced herself it was for the greater good. Months passed, and Amara found herself pregnant with Chief Odion's child. Her frail body, already weakened by the harsh conditions in the chief's household, struggled with the pregnancy. She grew weaker with each passing day, her once bright eyes now dimmed with exhaustion and sorrow. The village women whispered behind closed doors, shaking their heads in pity as they watched Amara wither away. As her due date approached, Amara's condition worsened. Chief Odion showed little concern for her well-being, more focused on the thought of having an heir. One stormy night, Amara went into labor, but complications arose. The village midwives tried their best, but they lacked the resources and knowledge to save her. After hours of agonizing pain, Amara passed away, leaving behind a stillborn child. Zuri, upon hearing the news, collapsed in grief. Her daughter, the light of her life, was gone. Overwhelmed with guilt, she realized that her desperate pursuit of wealth had cost her the life of her beloved Amara. She could no longer silence the voice in her heart that reminded her of the price they had paid. Weeks after Amara's burial, Zuri was haunted by dreams of her daughter. In the dreams, Amara's voice echoed through the wind, calling out, "Mama, why didn't you save me?" Zuri's guilt consumed her, and she withdrew from the village, unable to face the shame and the stares of the other villagers who whispered about the tragedy. One evening, Zuri went to the very spot where she used to sit with Amara by the fire. She stared at the stars, the same stars Amara had once gazed at with hope. But there was no hope left for Zuri. In her heart, she knew she could no longer bear the weight of her guilt. She had chosen wealth over her daughter's life, and the consequences were too great to live with. In the dead of night, Zuri took her own life, unable to endure the pain any longer. Her body was found by Kosi the next morning, her lifeless form crumpled near the fire pit, a single tear still fresh on her cheek. After Zuri's death, the village was consumed with grief and anger. The whispers about Chief Odion's cruelty grew louder, and villagers began to speak openly of the abuse Amara had endured. They spoke of the other young wives who had died under suspicious circumstances, and soon the authorities were called to investigate. Chief Odion, long protected by his wealth, was finally arrested. The truth about his mistreatment of his young brides and the circumstances surrounding their deaths came to light. He was charged with multiple counts of abuse and murder, and the chief who once ruled the village with an iron fist was dragged away in chains, his empire crumbling around him. The tragedy of Zuri and Amara's story echoed throughout the village for years to come, serving as a grim reminder of the price of desperation and the destructive power of unchecked greed. Though their family was gone, their story became a lesson for the community, a story of how a mother's love, twisted by poverty and hopelessness, could lead to unimaginable consequences.